into the Sunday Journal. I'm your host, Matt Pitta. Thanks for being with us today. We get together each week to talk about issues facing Cape Cod, the islands, and all of southeastern Mass. Welcome into the program today. One of the biggest issues we're facing now and really into the next many years here on the Cape is the issue of the quality of our water, embayments, our oceans, the nearby harbors, etc., and the issue of nitrogen loading. It's a big issue we've been talking about a lot here on Cape Cod, and we're kind of moving into a new phase, I think. We're going to try to explain that for you over the next few moments here on our program. We've brought in three gentlemen from Three Bays Preservation in the town of Barnstable to try to sort out some of these issues of exactly what the 208 water plan is, what the issues are that we're facing, and how we're going to try to fix this over the next several years. Lindsey Counsell is the executive director of Three Bays Preservation and has been here for quite some time, and we've spoken of many, many times over the years. Lindsey, it's always good to see you. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having us, Matt.
The president of your organization, president of the board, is Mike Egan. And Mike, a pleasure to have you here as well.
Matt, thanks for having us.
And our second mic, we have two mics in the studio here. Our third mic, or second mic, is Mike Moynihan. He's the treasurer of Three Bays Preservation. And Mike, thanks for stopping by today. Appreciate it very much. So, Lindsey, I'm going to start with you. Give us, we're going to give you the 30-second commercial here so people know what your organization is about. Many people have heard about Three Bays Preservation, but tell us a little bit quickly about what the organization is.
Three Bays is a nonprofit environmental organization, and what we do is advocate for our watershed, which extends from Barnstable over to Sandwich and even into parts of Mashpee. And what we have evolved into is a science-based organization that really wants to get to the bottom of many of these problems that we're having in our embayments. We participated early on with UMass Dartmouth in the creation of the Mast Estuaries Project through our monitoring and programs there. And we've morphed into, through the 208 program, looking at some of the new alternatives that are available through that plan, which was created by the Cape Cod Commission, to solve some of the groundwater nitrogen problems. And what we will be doing going forward is to research some of these alternatives and see if they're viable for use in our specific watershed. And that's very important. We need to identify what types of solutions will work on the ground here in Barnstable.
So Three Bays itself started out as an organization that was looking to preserve sections of the town of Barnstable, the embayments around Centerville, Marston's Mills, etc.
Correct. They include the 3 bays of Cotuit Bay, North Bay, and West Bay, and then the sub-embayments like Princess Cove and Warren's Cove, those areas.
All right, that gives us a good overview of what Three Bays is about. Let's talk about the problem, the issue here that leads us to the 208 plan. And again, we'll do this kind of in a capsulized version. Many of our listeners are familiar with it, but many people may not. And I'll give it a quick run through here, and you guys can jump in. But the bottom line is that over the many years, we've been seeing nitrogen loading in our embayments and our harbors. As we're going to use this, I'll use the word first, eutrophication. I'll have you guys define it a little bit later on. We don't want to use too many big words that will confuse people this morning, but we're seeing a tremendous amount of this nitrogen that is coming from land and into our embayments and really kind of fouling up our water, not only just the embayments and the harbors, et cetera, but our water quality as well. That's a very simplistic version of what's going on, right?
And that's a good description. Basically, what has occurred on the Cape is that the development that started in the 70s and 80s and continued on for many years has placed septic systems, the system that deals with your wastewater from each home, into yards. And that system is not built or designed to remove any of the nutrients that come out of the septic system. So through the science projects that we've been participating in, we've been able to help quantify that the nitrogen problem in the coastal embayments is about 85% of the problem. So what we are geared for now is to research, as I mentioned earlier, some of these alternatives that will be less expensive than straight sewering, which previous to the development of these 208 plan was the only option really available. So we are embarking on that investigation, and I look forward to coming forward with some great new techniques that will be available.
Let me bring in some of the other gentlemen here in our conversation. I'll bring in Mike Egan, the president of the board. Mike, for the last couple of years, people were debating exactly how we were going to go forward, and there was this time, I'm sure as you know, not too long ago, when the concern was, are we going to get what we call the big pipe solution, if you will, and there was a lot of concern by people that we would become MWRA South, and there'd literally be be some huge pipe going down the middle of the Cape, and we'd have this massive, sewer system like Deer Island or something like that. And that was a concern for a lot of people. So that led us into the lawsuits that we were facing here on the Cape, and then the 208 plan. So in terms of that, the 208 plan, what are we talking about when we refer to that?
Well, the 208 plan, if we think of it as bookends, on one end is the big pipe solution, sewer, everything. That's on one end of the spectrum. On the other, opposite would be, could you mitigate this problem through a myriad of technologies, from permeable reactive barriers to adding shellfish, fertilizer control, stormwater management, a whole collection of techniques and technologies on the other end. Think of it as a bookend. Personally, I'm predicting that the solution is a blend of the two. Has to be some kind.
Some areas on the Cape already are sewered.
True.
The town of Barnstable has a sewer system, and other towns do as well. But the consensus came, many years ago that there was not going to be one major sewer system on Cape Cod, basically.
To be cost effective, there has to be a density component, and with the right density, sewering becomes the most cost effective. But certainly not everywhere for everyone.
So take us again a little bit briefly here. When we talk about the 208 plan, there was a lawsuit that was brought forward against the region, against the EPA was sued by CLF, Conservation Law Foundation, and that really kind of led to this 208. It didn't lead to the 208 plan, but it led to where we are now, and that we're looking at ways to move forward on a watershed by watershed basis and dealing with our nitrogen loading, so we don't have to just put a big pipe down the middle of the highway.
Yes,
Lindsey?
that was a very important aspect of it. It really gave the state and the federal government a chance to re-look at the way that they wanted to manage this groundwater pollution. And the innovative thing is that the governments were really receptive to some of these newer alternatives. Many of the techniques have been used in other situations, like EPA Superfund cleanup. That's where the PRB originated. And they noticed through their testing that, wow, on the other side of these PRBs, low nitrogen. Very important. Another factor has been using oysters or shellfish in general as a cleanup. We know that they take a lot of the algae out of the water through their regular eating, and that can reduce the impact of this harmful pollutant on our bays. So that was the real breakthrough in 208 planning, and that the lawsuit by CLF brought to the forefront. And that was a very important milestone for the Cape in this planning process.
And many people believe, again, it avoided us having some type of massive system hoisted upon us that, honestly, as you guys have been pointing out, would probably not be the best thing for all of the Cape. Right? Why is that? I'll bring in Mike Moynihan. Mike, you deal a lot in the aquaculture aspect, I believe, as you said, you're the treasurer of the organization, but you kind of have an expertise in the aquaculture aspect of things.
I've been leaning towards that, and more to your direct question about why it is, I think oftentimes when we propose a solution to the general community, especially the price tag, a lot of times freaks people out. So the cost of sewering the entire Cape, besides it being possibly not the best solution, was overwhelming to many people who begin to consider, especially when they don't necessarily see directly. I got involved just a few years ago myself, and when I began to notice that our bays and estuaries are not all that they used to be. But on the surface, many people say there's no real problem here. This place is beautiful. And in reality, our water quality is degrading significantly from what it used to be. And so this toolbox allows us to use every tool available to begin correcting the problem, and many of them have a much faster response time, if you will, and they're going to help our bays and estuaries much quicker than, say, the most expensive tool in the toolbox would.
Is part of it when we say that people sometimes don't kind of get what's going on is because if you go to the beach and you're standing there, you're just kind of sitting on the beach, or you're taking a walk, you may not notice that there's an issue, but they don't really know what's going on under the water, basically, if you will. And so there has to almost be an education component to the people on the Cape that, listen, it looks nice and it looks pristine, but when you kind of dig down, literally, I know that Paul Niedzwiecki told me a story once. I think he was on the Mashpee River, and they took some core, it was just dead. The bottom of the river was completely dead because of all the nitrogen. So how do you deal with that? Just the education component, telling people, it looks nice, but... Well,
let me jump in. Short of a major fish kill, which would occur in perhaps some of the upper reaches of our estuary because of as the vegetation decays, it sucks oxygen out of the water, robbing the fish of oxygen. And there are some places in America and the world where you get major fish kills. Short of that shocking the population, there's hundreds of anecdotal stories. One of our board members lives in Upper Princess Cove, and as a boy, he had to shovel oyster shells out of the way because he couldn't walk on the beach in his bare feet because there are oysters everywhere. There's not an oyster that exists up in Princess Cove. We have one of the science that we've done every year is there's a tool you can use to measure the clarity of the water to a certain depth. Lake Tahoe, for instance, is famous for being the clearest lake in America. In North Bay, you can barely now get down 18 inches before it disappears from view.
And that's because a lot of the nitrogen loading.
The nitrogen loading causes an algae bloom, which causes opacity. One of our other members grew up, Z. Crocker, grew up here. The Crocker family's been here for generations. Eelgrass was what he would walk through on his beach. There's not a blade of eelgrass to be seen.
If you're just joining us today on the Sunday Journal, we're talking with three gentlemen from Three Bays Preservation in the town of Barnstable as we discuss where we're going with some of our 208 planning, our water planning for the Cape. Lindsey, Counsell, Mike Moynihan, and Mike Egan are my guests. So where are we now? Lindsey, I'll go back to you. We want to get this information out as to what's kind of next in the process. Lawsuit settled, 208 plan now in force here. So what are we going to be seeing next?
Well, that's a very good question at this point. What's occurring now is the Cape Cod Commission has set a deadline of June 30th, 2016 for these so-called bookend plans that Mike Egan mentioned earlier. And that's really a review, watershed by watershed for each town, of what the conceptual plan for a solution for these problems would be. And that will guide the planning process going forward as we start to weigh what's needed in these different watersheds for cleanup of the waterways and the affordability factor. So that will be the first stepping stone for the town to then sit back and take a look at, okay, here we have this information. These options will solve the problem. Now we have to look at how we're going to pay for it, what is the least environmentally disruptive in that plan, and also socially disruptive. If you go to the sewer option, there's a lot of digging and road work that needs to be done, or do you go to the more of the softer solutions, as they call them, that are less invasive?
There are, when you think of the Cape and you kind of break it out into regions, I think you can see, and maybe the listeners can understand, that you have to have different types of solutions. If you go to Truro, I'm sure, doesn't need the types of solutions that Hyannis needs in West Yarmouth and Falmouth Heights.
Correct.
I mean, really completely different situations, right?
Absolutely. And even the very shape of the embayments that we're dealing with, it varies from town to town. If you look at Falmouth, they have those long, narrow embayments. And you look at Barnstable on the south side, and we have these rather rotund embayments that retain water for longer periods. So each town needs to evaluate each individual watershed that it has for these solutions. Barnstable has 6 watersheds that it deals with. Falmouth, I think, has over 14. So they have a massive planning problem that they need to deal with watershed by watershed. So it is complicated, but fortunately through 208 we do have options that will help us solve it less expensively.
What do you see as some of the funding options here? Because, for instance, I'll just use as an example, we'll use your town, Barnstable. Let's say that you decide that there's areas that you need to collaborate with in terms of your border towns, Mashpee or Sandwich or Yarmouth. So will there have to be collaboration in terms of how certain portions of projects are financed?
Yes, there would have to be and will have to be intermunicipal agreements between towns to share the expense for that particular watershed. And that may be involved something as creative in the Hyannis area of bringing some of the western portion of Yarmouth, some of that wastewater to the Hyannis treatment plant, for example. So the options are myriad in terms of what's available, but there will be, there have to be agreements between the town on how to cost share that and how to pay for it over time.
Let's talk about some of the options I think are really innovative. Mike Moynihan, I'll bring you back in from the aquaculture standpoint. I know Mashpee has been moving forward with putting in oyster propagation, and a lot of these oysters are a great filter for nitrogen, as I understand. So will that be part of the solution in terms of different watersheds, that in fact you might not need any type of actually a physical system? You just put some oysters in a certain area, and that may be part of the solution.
They're definitely part of the solution, and I think it's almost obvious to everyone that we used to have far more shellfish in our bays and estuaries, and their very absence is contributing to the negative effect that the nitrogen loading is having on our bays and estuaries. And it's all kinds of shellfish that are filter feeders and help with the water quality, as well as having an exceptional byproduct as our constituents enjoy them. It's a rite of passage on the fish and enjoy them, and that's becoming harder and harder to do. So it's a win-win for everyone as we cultivate ways that the town can be more effective in restoring larger open areas due to water clarity being cleaned up, as well as propagation, as well as looking at the options of allowing the existing aquacultures to increase the amount of animals that they're producing over the course of a year. And it helps both the businessman as well as the environment and the consumer on the other end.
A whole long time ago, when the state was in the business of paying to put in sewers around the Commonwealth in many communities, as I'm sure we all remember, there was a lot of money that was flowing. The Cape wasn't part of that at that point. That's why I think we didn't, we weren't part of that push for sewering. I remember back early 80s and such. With that said, as we move forward with whatever methods we're going to use, is there any state, federal money out there we're going to try to go after? What's out there for us, Lindsey?
Well, there has been some federal money coming into the EPA for getting started on these pilot projects, if you will. They are looking at permeable reactive barriers in Barnstable to see if they're going to be effective, and they've planted some seed money elsewhere across the Cape for other types of projects. The Cape Cod Commission has mentioned a number of around 50% would be an equitable solution for if the Cape could bring in state and federal monies. That would leave a balance of 50% for us to fund here on the Cape. That's a great target. I think it'll work. And I think it would also be an economic generator here in the Cape, because much of these options that are available in 208, it's really a jobs program. It's going to be a good career for a young person to get involved with some of these innovative alternative treatment methods. There's nobody doing it right now. We've met with several consultants recently that are investigating moving forward on this kind of thing. So if it's planned properly and implemented in a strategic way, I think we can really make this benefit in more ways than just cleaning up the water.
We're just about out of time. What's a good resource for people who want some more information on what we're talking about? Your websites, Lindsey, others, where should people go?
Well, you can go to our website, which is www.bays.org. We have some of the more recent studies on there. Another good resource is the Cape Cod Commission website. They have the full 208 plan there, and you can review that and take out the different sections that you're interested in as you go forward.
Well, gentlemen, we're just about out of time. I'd like to thank all three of you for coming by. Lindsey Counsell is the Executive Director of Three Bays Preservation. Mike Egan is the President of the Board, and Mike Moynihan is the Treasurer. We'll have you back again soon. We could talk about this for a lot longer, the whole lot of issues that are tied in with this. So thank you for the three of you for stopping by today and talking about this important issue for the Cape. We appreciate it very much.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for being here today on the Sunday Journal. I'm your host, Matt Pitta.